The monsoon rains swept across the plains of India like sheets of silver, thunder rolling through the sky as if the gods themselves were preparing for war. The year was 326 BC, and Alexander of Macedon stood on the western bank of the great river Hydaspes, known today as the Jhelum, staring across at the vast land of King Porus, ruler of a mighty realm in the Punjab. After years of conquest stretching from Greece to Babylon and beyond, Alexander now faced a new world, strange, humid, and filled with colors and creatures his men had never seen before. But what awaited him across the river was not just another city to capture, but a king as proud and unyielding as himself. For months, Alexander's army had marched eastward, crossing mountains and deserts, chasing the dream of reaching the ends of the world. Yet here, in India, that dream met resistance. King Porus was no frightened satrap or minor ruler. He commanded a disciplined army, tall warriors, powerful cavalry, and above all, war elephants. Beasts the Macedonians had only heard of in tales. These enormous animals stood like living fortresses, armored and trained to crush men beneath their feet, to scatter ranks with trumpeting fury. Alexander knew this battle would test not only his tactics, but his will. The two armies faced each other across the river. Porus positioned his forces on the far bank, daring Alexander to cross. The Hydaspes was swollen by rain, its currents fast and treacherous. A direct assault would be suicide. Horses would drown, phalanxes would break, and the enemy would slaughter any who reached the shore. Alexander watched, studied, and waited. He knew Porus expected him to cross where he stood, so he decided to deceive him. Night after night, Alexander moved his campfires along the riverbank, creating noise and commotion to confuse his opponent. He feigned preparations at several points, forcing Porus to move his army up and down the opposite shore. The Indian king remained cautious, refusing to be tricked. But Alexander was patient. He had faced far greater foes and tricked them all. When the moment came, he would strike like lightning. One stormy night, under the cover of darkness and thunder, Alexander gathered a select force, his elite companion cavalry, light infantry, and a portion of his phalanx. Horses struggled against the current, men clung to ropes, and lightning illuminated their faces, fierce and determined. By dawn, Alexander had achieved the impossible. He and his strike force stood on the Indian side of the Hydaspes, unseen by Porus's main army. When the scouts of Porus finally spotted them, the alarm was raised, but it was too late. The Indian king quickly dispatched his son with a contingent of cavalry and chariots to block the Macedonians. The two sides clashed on wet, muddy ground. The Indian chariots, once swift and powerful, bogged down in the soaked earth. Alexander's cavalry swept through them, cutting down the enemy and slaying Porus's son before reinforcements could arrive. When Porus heard of his son's death, grief turned to fury. He gathered his entire army, thousands of infantry, cavalry, and more than 200 war elephants, and marched toward Alexander. The battlefield stretched across open terrain, now slick with mud from the storm. The elephants lined the front, their tusks wrapped in metal, their riders armed with javelins and bows. Behind them stood Porus's infantry, long spears glinting beneath the sun that had finally broken through the clouds. Alexander's troops took position swiftly. He placed his cavalry on both flanks, his phalanx in the center, and light troops in between. He had studied the elephants carefully. They terrified men and horses alike, but they could also be turned into chaos if handled wrong. Alexander's plan was daring. He would outflank Porus, drawing his attention to one side, then strike from the other. As the two kings surveyed each other, there was a moment of silence before the storm. Porus, tall and imposing, rode atop a massive elephant, his armor gleaming with gold, his face calm but resolute. Alexander, on his famous horse Bucephalus, raised his spear and shouted for the charge. Trumpets blared, drums thundered, and the Battle of Hydaspes began. The elephants advanced first, shaking the earth. Their deep roars echoed through the valley, a terrifying sound unlike anything the Macedonians had faced before. The phalanx braced, their sarissas, long spears, forming a wall of iron. The elephants crashed into the ranks, tossing men into the air, breaking formations, trampling the wounded. Chaos spread, but Alexander's soldiers did not break. Archers targeted the mayhouts, the riders guiding the elephants, bringing many beasts under control or turning them wild. Some elephants, enraged and wounded, turned back upon their own lines, crushing friendly troops in their madness. Meanwhile, Alexander executed his flanking maneuver. Leading his cavalry on the right, he circled around the Indian left wing. Porus countered, sending his own cavalry to meet the threat, but this was exactly what Alexander wanted. At his signal, his left flank cavalry struck from the opposite side, surrounding Porus's horsemen in a deadly pincer. The Indian cavalry fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by the superior tactics and coordination of Alexander's forces. As the elephants grew tired and the Indian lines began to falter, Alexander pressed the attack. His infantry advanced methodically, driving spears into gaps, pushing through mud and corpses. Bucephalus, though aging, carried his master through the thick of battle with unflinching strength. Arrows whistled, swords clashed, and the cries of men and beasts filled the air. The river that morning had been clear. By afternoon, it ran red. Porus fought like a lion, refusing to retreat even as his army crumbled around him. His elephant was wounded, yet he remained upon it, commanding his men with the calm of a true king. He towered above the battlefield, a symbol of courage that inspired those still fighting. Alexander, recognizing the valor of his foe, ordered his men to capture Porus alive. When the fighting finally ceased and the last resistance ended, Alexander rode forward through the wreckage of battle. His armor was dented, his horse wounded, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Before him stood Porus, still atop his wounded elephant, exhausted but unbroken. The two kings faced one another in silence. Conqueror and conquered, equals in spirit if not in fortune. Alexander admired courage above all things, and here was a man who embodied it. When he asked Porus how he wished to be treated, the Indian king replied simply, "Like a king." Those words struck Alexander deeply. He smiled and answered, "So it shall be." In that moment, there was no hatred, no humiliation, only respect. Alexander restored Porus to his throne, granting him not only his kingdom but also additional territories as a gesture of honor. He knew that ruling through respected allies was wiser than ruling through fear. The two men, once enemies, became allies. Porus would serve as a loyal satrap in Alexander's empire, maintaining peace in the lands of the Indus. The Battle of Hydaspes was one of Alexander's most costly victories. Many of his men had fallen, and even his beloved Bucephalus was gravely injured, dying soon after the battle. Alexander mourned deeply, burying the horse with full honors and founding a city on the spot, naming it Bucephala in memory of his companion. It was a rare glimpse of tenderness from a man who had spent his life in conquest. Though victorious, the battle marked a turning point. His army, weary and scarred, looked eastward toward the unknown and hesitated. Beyond the Hydaspes lay more kingdoms, more rivers, and tales of armies larger than any they had faced. Alexander's soldiers, having marched for years through endless wars, began to long for home. The monsoon rains, strange lands, and unfamiliar faces reminded them that even glory had its limits. But for Alexander, the Battle of Hydaspes was not just another triumph. It was proof of his genius, his endurance, and his ability to overcome even nature itself. He had crossed deserts, mountains, and now rivers swollen by storm, and each time he had emerged victorious. Yet in Porus he had found not just an opponent, but a reflection of himself, a man of pride, courage, and vision. As the sun set over the blood-stained plains, Alexander looked eastward, wondering what worlds remained to conquer. He did not yet know that his men would soon refuse to go further, that the return march would test him more than any battle, and that his own life would end far sooner than his dreams. But on that day at Hydaspes, standing beside the body of Bucephalus and the humbled yet noble Porus Alexander, was truly the master of the known world, undefeated, unstoppable, and forever destined to be remembered as the greatest conqueror in history.